There are many things you would not want to happen to your plane. One thing you certainly wouldn't want are bits falling off it in flight. The story of British European Airways Flight 411 will be, at the time of recording, the earliest incident in aviation history we have covered on the channel. It's a disaster which is one of the deadliest to occur in the British city of Manchester. According to local sources, many people, including locals, do not have any knowledge of this event. Occurring in 1957, air accidents were on average more common relative to the amount of flights performed on a daily basis today. Sources are limited, but we can delve into the history of the flight, the aircraft, and what happened during the accident. At a quick glance of research, we know something fell off the plane. We'll examine how this damaged the pilot's ability to fly the plane, leading to disaster. In the late 1940s, the British airplane manufacturer Vickers launched a new plane which they called the Viscount. The plane was actually the very first turboprop airliner to ever fly, differing greatly from the other propeller planes of its day, which were powered by piston engines. The Vickers Viscount in many ways can easily resemble a modern plane with its pressurized cabin and familiar interior design. Though first taking flight in 1948, the plane began flying regularly for British European Airways in 1953. British European Airways was one of the largest air carriers in the United Kingdom before its merger into the modern British Airways airline that flies today. The 1950s was an exciting time for air travel, as the first jetliners were introduced. Airports, especially in Europe and North America, were becoming more modern and relatively comfortable. BEA moved their hub to the new Heathrow Airport in 1954, but the airline also had other operating bases in other cities across the country, including Manchester. BEA was certainly an airline with a troubled history. The flight of interest today was only one of many in a long string of incidents at the airline, especially throughout the 1950s. There had been multiple fatal hull losses at the airline in 1950 and 1953 in both London and Belfast respectively. In the following years, the airline would continue to have fatal accidents occur under its name. The accident flight of discussion today was the return flight into Manchester from Amsterdam. British European Airways Flight 411 took off from Amsterdam in the afternoon of March 14, 1957. The Vickers Viscount plane, registered as Golf Alpha Lima Whiskey Echo, was built in 1952 and delivered to BEA new. On this flight, there were a total of 20 occupants, 15 passengers and 5 crew. The plane only needed 2 pilots to fly. The names of the pilots, however, appear to have been lost to time. There supposedly does exist a book on the incident, but I have been unable to source this, although this first sentence did not give me much hope for it anyway in research of this video. The majority of Flight 411 that day in 1957 went off as normal. The plane left Amsterdam, crossed the North Sea, crossing much of England before descending towards Manchester. The airport at Manchester at the time, named Ringway Airport, had just one runway at the time. The site expanded into the much larger airport that serves Manchester today. Flight 411 was preparing for landing on what is now modern-day runway 23 right. It was a cloudy day. The cloud base was also rather low, but weather was reported to not have been a contributing factor in the accident. The plane was being guided to the airport by air traffic control in what was called a ground-controlled approach. The approach path into Manchester Airport took, and still to this day, takes planes over residential areas. The area of Wythenshawe sits nearby to Manchester Airport. 1 year prior to the incident, a former airport firefighter by the name of Wally Wilding raised concerns about low-flying aircraft in close proximity to the airport in Manchester. Mr. Wilding lived on Shadowmoss Road, and he raised concerns about the safety of homes located here. Shadowmoss Road is a road nearby to Manchester Airport that is in very close proximity to the approaching flight path to the runway, and also the departing flight path in the reciprocal direction. Wilding protested his concerns at the local level, petitioning to the local council, Planes, however, continued to fly along the same flight path. British European Airways Flight 411 flew that approach path on March 14, 1957. This Vickers Viscount, over the years it had been in operation, had been withstanding the forces that came with regular flight, succumbing to the general wear and tear of airline use. Going back to what I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we should now examine what happened to this plane in its final moments. Like almost every other plane, pilots of the Viscount used flaps to slow their plane for approach and landing. The bigger wing provides more lift at slower speeds. On each wing there is a large flap which is moved on command via the flap controls in the cockpit. The area of interest stems from the right side flap. The bolt which secures the flap to other parts of the wing structure on the underside of the wing had failed as a result of metal fatigue. Over the many flights which the plane would have taken, various pieces of the plane were more likely to be weakened over time from the general stresses of flight. We could assume on this occasion that the bolt in question likely developed countless tiny fractures in the metal, which over time developed into bigger cracks from the continuous stress of flight cycles. If left unchecked, airplane parts can fail, and on that day in 1957, it is believed that this is what happened to a bolt securing the flap to the right side wing on British European Airways Flight 411. I should also mention that one source indicates that the flap was connected to the wing with just one bolt. The aircraft was around 1 mile from the runway when the bolt failed. As the flap then came away from the wing, the plane's aerodynamics immediately shifted. To investigators, it appeared as if the ailerons became locked when the failure occurred. Because of this, the pilots were not able to recover from what the plane naturally did next. The Viscount entered a shallow turn over to the right, steepening with every second, leading to a loss of control. The tendency the plane had to roll to the right was due to the left wing now producing more lift than the right side, which was damaged and now missing a functioning flap. As the aircraft was on final approach, there was not much altitude between the plane and the ground. Moments later, the right wingtip struck the ground on a grassy area short of the runway, adjacent to the houses on Shadow Moss Road. The aircraft continued on the ground for a further 75 to 80 meters, where it struck a home on Shadow Moss Road. The plane exploded, completely destroying the impacted house. A further 3 homes were also severely damaged. All 20 people on board the plane were killed. The house which Flight 411 crashed into also happened to be the home of Wally Wilding, the man who initially raised concerns of low-flying aircraft in his area. Though he survived, he was not home at the time of the accident. His wife and 2-year-old son were killed in the disaster, bringing the death toll to 22. Though fires from the crash were quickly extinguished, rescue teams spent hours recovering bodies with no survivors. The airline, British European Airways, grounded its fleet of Viscounts pending an investigation. Despite the devastation, there was never any national news coverage of the disaster. Though the incident made front-page news in local Manchester newspapers, many people, even locals to this area of northern England, don't realise that this accident ever occurred. There was no memorial following the disaster. In 2017, when an article was written in a local Manchester news outlet, there were calls for a permanent memorial to be set up in what locals called a forgotten air disaster. The incident was likely overshadowed by other air disasters which plagued Manchester over the years. The following year, in 1958, an airspeed ambassador also belonging to British European Airways, carrying the Manchester United football team, crashed in Munich, killing 23 people. In 1967, a British Midland C-4 Argonaut crashed in Stockport, also nearby to Manchester Airport, killing 72 people. Both of these incidents will be subjects in their own videos in the future. On top of those, there was also the 1985 British Air Tours incident which killed 55 people on the runway at Manchester. To learn more about that case, please see the video that we have already made on the matter. British European Airways and the Vickers Viscount have now long since become relics of British aviation. British European Airways merged with multiple other carriers, becoming British Airways in 1974. And the Viscount, Though the 4-engine turboprop was a popular plane in its day, it has now been retired for decades. Hi everybody, thanks so much for watching. I know this video has been a bit shorter than others, but I hope you found it interesting nonetheless. If so, be sure to like and subscribe, as there is always a new video every Saturday. Anyway, I want to take a moment to thank my patrons over on Patreon for their continuous support. If you would like to have your name featured here or read out at the end of the next video, you can join the Disaster Breakdown Patreon from £3 per month, and the link to that will be in the pinned comment below. Patrons also get early access to all new videos 48 hours before they go out publicly on YouTube. So a thank you to my £5 tier patrons: Avery Tioda, Hunter Heilman, Hector Palmatellas, Joey, John Ambrosia, Ken Zachman, Kenneth Morins, Christy, Leon St. Jennings, Marie Ennis, MG, Michelle, Mom Left Me at Best Buy, My Name is Chloe, Pac-Man7, Panic Chicken, Pedro Cruz, Rebecca Rivers, Rez, Ria Whitley, Saria Melody, Sleepy, Sue Shoes, TriStar Triforce, and Tristan Kriegsman. And a thanks to the £10 tier patrons for the incredibly generous support: Aidan Montgomery, Ann Sid, Bard Ghost Isu, Derek Bean, Erin Wilson, Espelon, Extreme Brooklyn Accent, James Bluke, Karma, Megan Garrick, Mike Milton, Roger Mayer, Steve Cottrell, So FP, who actually updated their Patreon pledge to £10, so thank you, Thick Coconut, Vapronva, and Where Are My Cheetos? Thank you all so very much. That is it for me this week. I hope you have a good weekend, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.